Kale was only a stable lad, known across the small valley of Aurelis for his quiet work and steady hands. Every day he swept the stables, fed the dragons and fixed broken tools. Most people thought his life was simple, even boring, but Kale did not mind. The dragons were strange creatures, massive and unpredictable, and that was enough adventure for most days. He liked the smell of hay, the warmth of the sun on his back, and the occasional soft nuzzle of a dragon when no one was looking. One evening, as the sun sank behind the jagged cliffs, Kale noticed a faint glow coming from the far side of the valley. He had never seen it before. The villagers had warned him never to go near the old cavern at the edge of the cliffs. They said it was haunted, filled with spirits that could drive a man mad. But Kale's curiosity burned stronger than his fear. He paused, listening, and then heard it, a whisper. His name. Kale? It hissed softly, almost like the wind, almost like a dragon speaking in a language he did not know. Heart pounding, Kale stepped closer to the cavern. The entrance was narrow, jagged stone forming a dark mouth that seemed to breathe. The glow came from inside, flickering and strange, and the whispers grew louder. Kale hesitated. He could hear the cautionary tales in his mind, the warnings of villagers who feared the cavern. But there was something in the sound calling him, something older than humans, older than the mountains. It promised a secret, a power he could not yet understand. When Kale finally stepped inside, the air changed immediately. It was warmer, thick with a golden light that seemed to float in the dust. The walls of the cavern were carved with strange symbols, spirals and lines that glowed faintly. Kale's eyes widened. He had never seen anything like it. The whispers were no longer words, just feelings, sensations, an echo in his mind that made his body tingle. It felt as though the cavern itself was alive, watching him. As Kale walked deeper, the floor began to tremble. Small rocks shifted under his feet, and the light pulsed as if in rhythm with some unseen heartbeat. Then, in the center of the cavern, he saw it, a circle of ancient stones, carved with patterns that seemed to shift when he looked directly at them. The whispers became clearer, now forming words he could almost understand. They spoke of dragons, primordial dragons, beings of incredible power that had shaped the world before humans walked the lands. The stones called to him, promising knowledge, strength, and a bond that had been lost for centuries. Kale stepped into the circle without fully knowing why. The moment his foot touched the smooth stone, a shock ran through him. He felt a strange energy rising, wrapping around his mind like invisible chains. Images flashed in his head, dragons soaring across glowing skies, mountains splitting under their claws, oceans stirred by their wings. The whispers were no longer soft. They roared in his mind, a chorus of voices both frightening and thrilling. Kale fell to his knees, clutching his head as the power tried to settle in him. He wanted to scream, but no sound came out. He felt small, yet suddenly larger, as if he carried the weight of centuries in a single heartbeat. Then he heard the real sound, something physical and frightening. The cavern mouth rattled as boots struck the stones outside. Dominion soldiers, the human army obsessed with capturing and controlling dragons, had found him. Their voices shouted over the wind, demanding he come out. Kale's heart raced. He was just a stable lad, unarmed, untrained for war. Panic surged through him, but the energy from the stones pulsed in his veins, steadying his nerves. He realized, with a mix of awe and terror, that he could not run from what had begun. The soldiers stormed in, weapons glowing and ready. Kale ducked behind one of the ancient stones, watching as they fanned out across the cavern. His mind, still buzzing from the circle's power, made strange connections. He could sense their movements before they happened, see paths that would keep him safe. It was frightening to feel so much, to know so much, yet Kale also felt an unexpected courage. Somehow, the whispers of the dragons told him to stay calm. They were testing him, learning him, and he was not alone. Kale used the shadows of the cavern to move quietly, slipping past the soldiers as they searched. His heart pounded with every step, but the circle's energy guided him, warming his limbs and sharpening his senses. Outside, the valley was quiet, the last glow of sunset brushing the cliffs in red. Kale stumbled into the open air, feeling the energy fade slightly, though a trace remained in his bones. He looked back at the cavern, now dark and silent, and knew that something had changed. Something ancient had chosen to reach out to him, and Kale understood, even if only a little, that his life would never be simple again. The primordial dragons had whispered his name, and he had answered. He had touched a power no stable lad had any right to touch, and the world as he knew it had shifted forever. Kale stood in the fading light, breathing heavily, and looked up at the cliffs. Somewhere beyond, the dragons watched, waiting. He did not know how or when they would come to him, but he felt their presence like a shadow in his chest. It was both a promise and a warning. He would not be a simple stable lad for long. The journey had begun and the whispers were only the first step. As night fell, Cale returned to the stables. The dragons looked at him with curious eyes, as if sensing the change he carried. Cale fed them quietly, heart still racing, mind still echoing with the whispers of power. Somewhere, hidden and immense, the primordial dragons waited, knowing that a small human had stepped into their world. A human who might, one day, command what even the oldest beings feared. Cale could not sleep that night. The whispers of the cavern echoed in his mind, fading and returning like waves. He had never felt such power before, not even when he had lifted the heaviest buckets of feed or soothed the largest dragons in the stables. Something deep inside him had shifted. He felt stronger, sharper, and yet fragile, like a glass that could hold fire. He did not know what it meant, only that he could not ignore it. The next morning, Cale rose before the sun, the valley still wrapped in mist. The dragons stirred, stretching massive wings and yawning, smoke curling from their nostrils. Cale fed them quietly, his mind still on the cavern. Then a cry broke the morning silence, a sharp, terrified scream coming from the far side of the stables. Cale's heart leaped. He ran toward the sound, following the echoes through the barns and pens. There, half buried in a fallen rock tunnel, was a young dragon hatchling. Its scales glimmered like silver in the early light, but it was trapped. The hatchling thrashed wildly, snapping its tiny jaws and thrashing its tail. Cale froze for a moment. He knew he should call for help, but he also sensed something different. The hatchling was frightened, not dangerous, yet it lashed out at anyone who came near. Cale approached slowly. "Easy, easy little one," he whispered. His voice was calm, steady, carrying a confidence he did not yet feel. The hatchling snarled and twisted, hissing as rocks scraped against its scales. Cale reached out his hands carefully. For a long moment nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, the hatchling's body stilled. Cale felt a warmth in his chest, a faint tug from the energy that had touched him in the cavern. He pressed on, speaking softly, coaxing the hatchling. "I'm not going to hurt you. Trust me." Slowly the dragon allowed him to move closer. Cale lifted the rocks carefully, one by one, and guided the hatchling free. The creature shivered, but it did not fight him anymore. Cale gently stroked its head, and the hatchling leaned into his hand. He could feel a tiny heartbeat thrumming against his palm, a rhythm that matched his own in a strange, comforting way. By the time Cale carried the hatchling back to the stables, word had spread. Other villagers and stable hands arrived, eyes wide with shock. "How did you do that?" one asked. "It would have bitten anyone else." Cale shook his head, unsure himself. He had not thought of it as skill. He had simply listened, felt, and acted. But something inside him had guided the hatchling, and it had trusted him in return. That night, Cale could feel eyes watching him. He stepped outside the stables, the hatchling curled in a soft bed of hay nearby. The valley was quiet, the wind soft against the cliffs. Above, a shadow moved across the stars. Cale looked up and froze. A massive figure circled overhead, wings wide, scales shimmering in the moonlight. Eldrith, the first primordial dragon. Its eyes, glowing with ancient intelligence, focused on him. Cale's breath caught. He felt a pulse of energy from the creature, a silent acknowledgement, a message. It had seen him, and it approved. Cale did not know how long he stood there, staring at the vast living shadow. Then the hatchling made a soft sound, nudging his hand. Cale smiled, a small spark of pride warming his chest. The bond had begun. It was small, fragile, and unspoken, but it was real. He had passed the first test, though he did not yet know the rules or the final prize. The next day the Dominion scouts came closer to the valley. They had heard rumors about the stable lad who tamed dragons without weapons, who moved as if he could sense danger before it happened. Cale hid, feeling a strange calm. He could hear them, their voices harsh and demanding, calling for the dragons to submit. He realized something. The dragons listened, but not as soldiers. They listened as beings who understood the weight of power and trust. Cale stepped into the open, the hatchling at his side. His hands were empty, but his presence carried authority he did not fully understand. The Dominion soldiers paused, confused. How could a small human command even a young dragon? Cale's heartbeat quickened. He did not need to speak. The hatchling moved closer to him, wings folding, eyes bright and loyal. The soldiers hesitated. Cale raised his hand slightly, not as a threat, but as a signal. The hatchling responded, a quiet hiss of warning, and the soldiers realized the stable lad was not alone. Over the next weeks, Kale learned more. He discovered that the whispers from the cavern could guide him, help him sense danger, and understand dragons in ways no one else could. The dragons responded to him, not with fear or submission, but with trust and curiosity. Kale's confidence grew, and so did the attention from the Dominion. They watched from afar, waiting for a mistake, ready to strike if he faltered. One evening, Kale trained the hatchling in secret. He guided it to fly over the valley, to maneuver through rocky cliffs, to land on narrow ledges. The hatchling followed him without hesitation, trusting his movements as if they were written in its own instincts. Kale laughed aloud when it landed perfectly on a high cliff, wings folding proudly. For the first time he felt like more than a stable lad. He felt like someone who could face what no other human dared. Yet Kale knew this was only the beginning. The first test had been passed, but greater trials awaited. The primordial dragons were aware now. Eldritha's shadow still circled the valley at night, watching, waiting, and teaching in silence. Kale felt a mix of awe and fear. The bond had begun, but it was fragile. One wrong step, one moment of doubt, and everything could collapse. Still, Kale smiled, watching the young dragon settle beside him, breathing softly. He whispered back to the cavern quietly, almost to himself, "I will not fail." The wind carried his words, and somewhere beyond, in a hidden dimension of time and power, the primordial dragons heard. They knew he was learning. They knew he had the courage, even if he did not yet know the strength within. Kale looked at the valley, at the stars beginning to shine above the cliffs, and felt a strange warmth. The first test had ended, but the journey had just begun. He was no longer just a stable lad. Something greater waited, and he would face it step by step with heart and courage. And somewhere in the distant sky, Eldrith circled, a silent promise that the universe itself had begun to notice the boy who could touch the ancient dragons' hearts. The valley was quiet at dawn, but Kale knew it would not stay that way. The Dominion was coming. Scouts had been spotted near the cliffs, their weapons glinting in the rising sun. Kale could sense it in the air, the tension, the fear, the anticipation. The young dragon hatchling stayed close, nuzzling his side as if sensing the storm to come. Kale took a deep breath. He was no longer just a stable lad, but he still felt small against the power that was marching toward him. By mid-morning, the Dominion soldiers were visible across the valley. Their numbers were overwhelming, hundreds of humans in armored suits, armed with energy weapons and strange machines that could dig through rock and metal. They had one goal, to capture the dragons and the boy who had tamed them. Kale's heart pounded. He glanced at the hatchling, whose small body trembled but whose eyes burned with determination. Together they would face the army, even if Kale did not yet know how. Kale ran to the cavern, the place where the whispers had first reached him. He needed guidance, needed the energy of the ancient stones to flow through him again. The cavern was dark, but the symbols glowed faintly as he entered, reacting to his presence. The whispers returned, louder, urging him to trust, to command, to act. Kale closed his eyes and let the power settle in his chest. It was strange, like carrying fire inside his body, dangerous and wild, yet alive. He felt the connection to the primordial dragons, far beyond the hatchling, and a plan formed in his mind. The Dominion advanced, machines tearing through the grass and stone, guns ready. Kale stepped out of the cavern, hands raised, not in surrender but in calm command. His mind reached out, guided by the whispers, and he sensed dragons hidden in the cliffs, in caves, watching and waiting. Kale spoke softly to the hatchling, who understood him perfectly. Together they would act as the first wave. The soldiers charged, but the hatchling leapt into the air, wings strong and fast. It circled the soldiers, hissing, snapping, and drawing their attention. Kale shouted instructions, not with words alone, but with movements and energy that the hatchling followed perfectly. The Dominion hesitated, confused by the boy and the dragon. Their weapons fired, but Kale had learned to sense danger, and the hatchling dodged skillfully. Kale ducked behind rocks, guiding it, feeling the pulse of power from the cavern still flowing through him. Then the true test came. From the cliffs above, massive shadows descended, dragons, older and larger than any human had ever seen, scales glittering in sunlight, eyes glowing with intelligence and power. The primordial dragons had come, responding to the bond Kale had begun. Eldrith was first, its wings blocking out the sun, casting a shadow over the valley. Kale felt the energy flow from it, a deep, ancient acknowledgement of his courage. The soldiers froze, fear spreading as the ground shook beneath the dragon's steps. Kale raised his hands not to strike but to guide. The dragons listened, circling the Dominion, roaring and snapping in warning. Kale moved among the rocks, showing the hatchling and the others where to go, where to land, how to defend without destroying the valley. His mind connected with the dragons in a way no human had ever experienced. He felt their thoughts, their intentions, and they felt his. Together they were unstoppable, not because of strength alone, but because they moved as one. The Dominion soldiers regrouped, desperate, trying to fire their weapons. But every shot missed. The dragons anticipated, dodged, and intimidated without harming unless necessary. Cale's heart raced. He was terrified yet calm. Every instruction he gave was followed, every movement precise. He realized the truth: power alone was not enough. The dragons obeyed him because he had earned their respect, their trust, and they could sense his courage. Hours passed in a blur of motion and sound. The Dominion tried to encircle the valley, but Cale was always ahead, guiding dragons through cliffs, rivers, and hidden paths. Soldiers fell back, exhausted and confused, as Cale and the dragons used strategy over raw strength. He laughed in disbelief when a dragon lifted a machine into the air and tossed it harmlessly into a canyon. It was thrilling, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. As the sun dipped low, the Dominion realized they could not win. Their soldiers retreated, leaving the valley quiet once more. Cale, panting, leaned against a rock, the hatchling curled at his feet. The primordial dragons circled above, their eyes glowing, watching him. Eldrith landed nearby, its massive form casting Cale in shadow. The boy looked up, and for the first time he felt the weight of what he had achieved. He had faced an army not with weapons but with courage, heart, and a bond with creatures older than the mountains themselves. Cale knew this was only the beginning. The Dominion would return, stronger, smarter, more determined. But now Cale was not alone. The primordial dragons were with him, their power immense, their presence a promise of protection. Cale felt a strange pride. He had started as a stable lad, ignored by most, underestimated by all. Yet now, even the mightiest human army had bowed to the strength of his courage and the dragon's loyalty. That night, Cale stood atop a cliff, looking over the valley. The hatchling flitted near him, restless and alive, and Eldrith landed beside him, bowing its massive head slightly. Cale reached out a hand, feeling the warmth of the dragon's scales. The whispers of the cavern returned softly, telling him he had done well, but reminding him that greater challenges were ahead. He was learning to wield the bond, to guide the dragons, and to face what the universe might send next. Cale took a deep breath, watching the stars emerge above the cliffs. The Dominion had tested him, and he had survived. The primordial dragons had acknowledged him, and the valley was safe for now. He smiled quietly. The first battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Yet Cale was ready. Not just a stable lad, but something more, something stronger, something the universe had never seen before. He whispered to the hatchling and the massive dragons around him, "We will be ready. Together." And somewhere in the sky, beyond what any human could see, the dragons answered in kind, their roars echoing across the cliffs, a sound that promised both power and protection. Cale felt it in his chest, a fire of courage and a bond that would change everything. The Dominion had returned to their empire defeated, but Cale knew they would come again. And next time he would be even stronger. The valley slept under a calm sky, but Cale knew it would not stay quiet for long. He had tasted the first test of real power, and he was learning fast. The primordial dragons had noticed him, and the universe had begun to take him seriously. Cale looked out into the dark valley and smiled. He was ready for whatever came next. Cale stood at the edge of the valley, the wind whipping through his hair, carrying the scent of stone, grass, and dragon fire. The battle with the Dominion was over, but Cale knew this was only the beginning. The primordial dragons were restless. Their presence filled the sky, shadows stretching across the cliffs, wings folding and unfolding in silent power. Cale's chest felt tight, full of excitement and fear. The whispers from the cavern had grown louder in his mind, guiding him, urging him to step forward, to face what he did not yet understand. It began at dawn. From the highest peaks of the cliffs, massive figures appeared, dragons older and larger than any living being Cale had ever seen. Their scales shimmered with colors that seemed impossible: gold, silver, deep violet, and black, each reflecting the light in a way that made the rocks and rivers glow. Eldrith hovered beside Cale, its eyes soft but deep, filled with intelligence older than the mountains. The other dragons circled above, creating a massive ring, their crowns glinting faintly as if touched by starlight. Cale stepped forward, heart pounding. The energy in the air made his skin tingle. He could feel the dragon's thoughts pressing into his mind: curiosity, caution, wisdom, and immense power. They were speaking to him all at once, yet as one voice, calm and commanding. "You have survived the first trials. The voice echoed in his mind. You have shown courage, heart, and the willingness to trust. Now you stand before the council of the primordial dragons. Do you understand what this means, human? Kale swallowed hard, trying to find words, but none came. He nodded instead. The primordial dragons sensed his honesty, his lack of pretense, and their massive wings flicked slightly in approval. One dragon, larger than all the rest, descended slowly, its scales deep blue with streaks of silver. Its eyes locked on Kale. You are small among us, human, the dragon said in a voice that rumbled like thunder. And yet, you hold a spirit that commands respect. You have guided others, protected what is fragile, and faced overwhelming force without fear. Why should we offer you our trust? Kale's mind raced. He thought of the hatchling, the soldiers, the valley, the whispers. He thought of every choice he had made, every small act of courage that had brought him here. He spoke, voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. I am small, yes, but I have learned to listen. I have learned that strength without wisdom is nothing. I do not seek power for myself. I want to protect what is right, to guide those who cannot see clearly, and to honor the bond between humans and dragons. That is why I am here. The dragon's eyes narrowed. Some circled higher, wings slicing the air in silent evaluation. Eldrith nudged Kale gently with its massive snout, a quiet gesture of support. The council murmured in unison, a deep resonance that shook the cliffs and stirred the rivers below. Then, slowly, one by one, the crowns of the dragons lowered toward Kale. It was not a gesture of submission, but of acknowledgement, respect, and ancient authority passed silently through a bond stronger than fear or violence. You have spoken truth, the deep blue dragon said. Your courage is proven, your heart honest. Yet this choice is not yours alone. To bond with us fully is to accept knowledge and power beyond human understanding. You will see the universe not as it appears but as it truly is. You will bear responsibility for both humans and dragons alike. Can you endure this? Kale swallowed. His throat was dry and his hands trembled slightly, but he did not look away. I can endure, he said. I will do what is right even if it is hard. I will not fail those who trust me. The dragons lifted their heads, eyes glowing with approval. The air around Kale shimmered. He could feel the energy of the primordial dragons flowing into him, not as domination but as understanding. Memories of ancient times passed through his mind. Dragons flying across suns, humans and dragons working together to shape planets, the rise and fall of civilizations. Knowledge beyond his years, beyond his world, flooded him. It was dizzying, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. You are no longer merely a human, Eldrith said, voice soft but immense. You are our bridge, our chosen. The primordial bond is yours. Protect it well. Kale felt the power settle into him like a second heartbeat, steady and warm. The dragons circled higher, their massive wings stirring the clouds, and then they roared together, a sound so deep and full that the valley trembled. Kale's knees shook, but he smiled. This was the sound of respect, of acknowledgement, of a new era beginning. Kale looked down at the valley, at the small human villages that had watched him rise, at the dragons he had protected and trained. He understood now that the bond was not just about strength. It was about courage, heart, and wisdom. It was about trust between beings who had once been distant, almost strangers to each other. And now he held that trust in his hands. As the sun rose higher, Kale stepped forward, lifting his arms slightly. The primordial dragons responded instantly, lowering closer, wings brushing the clouds, crowns shining. Eldrith nudged him gently and Kale laughed softly, a sound of relief and wonder. He had been a stable lad, unnoticed and small, but now he was something more. He was chosen, recognized, and ready to lead. The council spoke one final time, a deep resonance that filled his mind. Go forth, human. Protect what must be protected. Guide those who cannot guide themselves. Honor the bond between your kind and ours, for the world watches and the universe listens. Kale bowed slightly, feeling the weight and the privilege of the words. He left the cliffs that day not as a simple stable lad, but as a guardian of an ancient bond. The primordial dragons flew beside him, shadows against the morning sun, guiding, watching, and teaching. Kale knew the dominion would return. Other threats would rise. But now he had the wisdom, courage, and power of the oldest beings in the universe to face them. Kale turned to the hatchling, who nuzzled his arm happily, unaware of the vast forces at play but trusting completely. He smiled, feeling the connection ripple through his mind, and whispered, "We are ready. Together." The primordial dragons roared in agreement, a sound that echoed through mountains and valleys, announcing the dawn of a new era. Kale took a deep breath, feeling the energy of the council settle inside him. The bond had been given, the choice accepted, and the future lay ahead, wide, uncertain, and full of promise. He was no longer a stable lad. He was something more, and the universe had taken notice. Cale stood on the highest cliff of the valley, the wind blowing through his hair, carrying the scents of grass, stone, and dragons. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Around him, dragons of every size and color circled, wings powerful and graceful, eyes bright and intelligent. The valley had changed. Where once there had been fear, confusion, and dominion soldiers, there was now peace, calm, and trust. Cale had learned much, yet he knew his work was just beginning. The hatchling he had saved long ago fluttered nearby, wings catching the sunlight. It chirped and nudged his hand, full of energy and life. Cale smiled, feeling a warm bond he could not describe with words. This little dragon, once helpless and afraid, had become his companion, his friend, and his reminder that even the smallest life could carry great meaning. Cale looked around and realized that the same was true for him. Once just a stable lad, he had grown, tested, and trusted by beings older than the stars. Humans from the valley began to gather, cautiously at first. They had heard stories of Cale and the dragons, whispered rumors that seemed too incredible to be true. As they approached, the dragons lowered their heads, not in threat but in acknowledgement. Cale raised his hands slightly, letting the humans know that there was no danger. Hesitant smiles appeared, and soon the villagers were close enough to see the scale and majesty of the primordial dragons. Awe and wonder replaced fear in their eyes. The Dominion, though defeated, had not disappeared entirely. Scouts and spies still lurked at the edges of the empire, watching, waiting. But Cale now understood that strength alone was not enough. Knowledge, courage, and compassion were just as important. He had learned from the primordial dragons that every choice mattered, every act of kindness or wisdom could shape the future. Power without heart could destroy, but power guided by respect and understanding could build a new world. Cale walked among the dragons, feeling their immense energy, sensing their thoughts, understanding their moods. They were no longer untouchable creatures, distant and dangerous. They were allies, partners, and teachers. Cale learned from them not just commands and battle strategy but patience, observation, and the deep wisdom of beings who had witnessed the birth of planets and stars. Eldrith hovered close, wings folding carefully, letting Cale feel the bond fully. The boy no longer felt fear. He felt confidence tempered with respect, courage strengthened by understanding. The villagers began to work with the dragons. Children ran with hatchlings, learning their movements, their sounds, their signals. Adults repaired stables and built new shelters, careful not to disturb the massive creatures. Cale guided them, teaching what he had learned from the primordial dragons: to listen, to observe, and to act with courage. The bond between humans and dragons grew stronger each day, rooted not in fear or dominance but in respect and care. As the seasons passed, Cale's legend spread beyond the valley. Other humans came to see the boy who had been a stable lad and had risen to lead dragons older than the mountains. They came with curiosity, hope, and sometimes fear, but Cale greeted them all. He shared what he could, teaching the bond, guiding new humans who showed courage and heart. The primordial dragons watched, sometimes silently, sometimes interacting, always testing, teaching, and acknowledging Cale's growth. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned shades of deep orange and purple, Cale climbed to a high cliff with Eldrith by his side. Below, the valley glowed in soft light. Dragons moved among the humans, playfully flying, landing, and resting. There was laughter, excitement, and life everywhere. Cale looked at Eldrith and whispered, "We did it, didn't we? We made a new world." Eldrith's eyes glimmered, and with a soft rumble that Cale understood perfectly, it answered. Not words but a feeling of pride, respect, and promise. Cale realized something important. His journey had not just been about saving dragons or defeating the Dominion. It had been about showing that even the smallest person could rise to greatness, that courage and heart mattered more than size or strength. He had started as a stable lad, ignored and underestimated, yet he had become a bridge between humans and dragons, between past and future, between fear and trust. The universe had taken notice, and he had proven that humans could rise to meet the impossible. That night, Cale stood among the dragons as stars filled the sky. Eldrith and the other primordial dragons circled high, their crowns glinting faintly, a silent acknowledgement of what had been achieved. Cale felt the energy of the bond in his chest, steady, warm, and endless. He looked down at the valley and the humans who now shared their world with dragons. He felt hope, pride, and a quiet joy. A new era had begun and Kale would guide it step by step with courage and wisdom. In the distance, other dragons stirred. Ancient, hidden dragons far beyond the valley sensed the bond had changed everything. The human who had been a stable lad was no longer small, no longer ignored. Kale understood that the universe had shifted, and that humans and dragons together could face whatever came next. He smiled, feeling the weight of responsibility but also the thrill of possibility. The valley slept under a calm sky, the dragons resting, humans safe, and the stars shining above. Kale stood tall, looking forward. He whispered quietly, "This is only the beginning. Together we are stronger." The dragons answered with soft roars and wing beats, echoing across the cliffs. Kale felt it deep inside. The universe was alive, listening, and he was part of something far greater than himself. He walked back to the stables as the first light of morning touched the peaks. The hatchling followed, playful and trusting. Eldrith hovered overhead, protective yet free, wings folding gracefully. Kale knew the Dominion might return one day, or new dangers might rise, but he was ready. Not as a stable lad, but as a human chosen by the oldest dragons, a guardian, a bridge, and a leader. The new era had begun. Humans and dragons would walk together, learning, growing, and protecting each other. And Kale, once overlooked and small, would stand at the center, guiding, teaching, and inspiring. The universe had noticed, and Kale understood at last that courage, heart, and wisdom could truly change everything. He took one last look at the valley, breathing in the air, feeling the bond, and whispered softly, "We are ready." The dragons answered in chorus, wings beating against the sky, and Kale smiled. This was a beginning unlike any other, a future built not by force, but by trust, courage, and the unbreakable bond between human and dragon.